We're talking box, and I've never been one for clipped box hedging, edging, topia or anything, but right outside my office window here, I'm very grateful to my mum 30 odd years ago for planting this one. It's Buxus sempervirens elegantissima. If you like, Iphions can grow them well. They like well-drained soil. Sort of foot of a south or west facing wall would suit them well in a lot of gardens. And they're winter flowering. This is the strongest pink flowered one that I've found so far. And it's got the most boring, terrible name. It's just called Dusky Pink.
Hello and welcome to Talking Dirty, another of our specials focusing on East Ruston Old Vicarage and all of the wonderful things happening there this time in February. Over at aforementioned garden, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, its co-owner, co-founder, co-gardener, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
Well, and thank you very much, and good morning to you. I tell you what, you always look so beaming. What weather have you got? We've got the sun just trying to get through today. A wet night again, of course, but there we are. But you look as if you're beaming in sunshine today over in Cambridgeshire. Thought is Maria Sophia Fredrickson, as ever. Charming, wonderful, witty. I love you.
I love you too, though it's amazing what sleep deprivation does for you. It was raining in the night. I can testify to that because I was up with my poor, slightly feverish baby at I think it was 3:30. So it was definitely raining in Cambridge at that point. He, fingers crossed, is doing much better, is much happier this morning. So we've sat down to talk about East Ruston Old Vicarage, which I was so sad to miss. The Snowdrop Day, the Snowdrop Openings, the Hardy Plant Society Day. I mean, it has all been going on in your garden, Alan.
Absolutely, it has. And I mean, there's two things. I'm sitting here this morning, and there's two things. There's a pond outside the window here, and you know that spring is coming, and it's very warm when the fish are on the top wanting to be fed. And they've been. I haven't seen them hardly at all during the winter, but I mean, there they are. That's what happens. And the bird song, it's just wonderful. We're starting to get a bit of a dawn chorus again, not a full dawn chorus yet. Obviously, it's too early for that. But it's the day length and it's the temperature, and it makes all the difference. Now, back to Snowdrop Day. Wow. Well, I mean, to say that we were dumbfounded is ridiculous. I mean, we had a ridiculous number of people. We had over 1,000 people on that day. And I mean, we hadn't expected such a huge turnout. And so therefore, you could say we were understaffed. But Graham rang me about, I don't know, 10:30 in the morning. He said, you better come to the car park. I'm going to have to open the overflow. To open the overflow, you have to be directed from the car park proper through a gate to another car park. And so it went on. And then we had to call Vicky from the plant stand to come up and give a hand. And everybody was in such lovely, lovely moods and things. And an awful lot of people that hadn't been before because they didn't know, from the car park, how to get into the garden and all the rest of it. But no, it was an absolutely wonderful, wonderful day. And we sold a very expensive plant on that day, which I was thrilled about, because we have in the garden some rather good Edgeworthias, Edgeworthia chrysantha. And I mean, ours are flowering very, very early. They don't normally flower probably until the end or February, beginning of March, but they're flowering now. And we had this one plant, and it was about £80. It was a huge one. And we sold it. I mean, that is strange, well, to say the least.
We can't mention Edgeworthia chrysantha without talking about red dragon. Well, I can't anyway, because I just dream of a day when I have this in my garden. And I know we've mentioned it in the past, but if perchance you've happened upon this podcast and you've never heard us before, you've never heard of red dragon before, I think it's a bit miffy. I think it's got to be in exactly the right place to get it to succeed, but it is just such a wonderful plant, such a glorious colour.
Well, yes to all of those things. I mean, it is, and it's also in very short supply. I don't know that many people have got it, and I bought my plants in from my wholesaler friend. And he said to me afterwards, he said, is your red dragon still alive? And I said, yes, it is. I planted two. One died, I have to say, but the other one has thrived and is absolutely looking splendid. Of course, it's at that point now where there's a few flowers open and the huge rush is yet to come. So there's a huge anticipation. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, everybody loves it, probably because there's a dearth of unusual flowering shrubs at this time of the year. Anyway, I did a little bit of research, and I find it very difficult to find anyone that stocks it. I think there is a farmyard nurseries, I think, over in Carmarthen. I think they've got it. By the way, if anybody's listening, they do an excellent mail order service. If you're tempted, do give them a call. But I would give them a call first to see whether they've got it or not. I don't know. My feedback that I got when I had my consignment from Richard, I only bought about 10, 2 of which I kept, is that most of them failed. And I think you're absolutely right when you say that this red dragon is a miffy little dragon. But the one that's there, I can't fault it. In fact, I'm going to have to, I keep putting it off, but I planted it rather too close to a stone path, and it's gradually encroaching onto the path. And I'm going to, do I leave it for another year? I think I'm going to have to
leave it
snip a
forever.
little
People can just get past.
Yeah. Well, that's how you feel about
shimmy,
it
shimmy,
sometimes.
shimmy.
Yeah. But no, I mean, the snowdrop day was wonderful. It's helped by the fact that we had good weather. And I think that, you know, when I came back from the car park and I walked through the front drive where the sellers all are, and there were smiling faces from all the sellers, I thought, yay, somebody's hit the jackpot today.
And of course, the great thing for you hosting an event like that is you get first dibs. You're out there letting people in, getting them set up first thing in the morning. And I'm sure having a little perusal of those stalls, maybe picking up 1 or 2 special plants.
Well, I had to buy from Joe because I feel I have to have more of it, and that's the snowdrop that you and he connived together to give the name Alan Gray to. So I bought 3 of those, and they're still very, very expensive. I mean, they were £100 each. I have to say that. And you can look at me and saying, silly old fool, he's got more money than sense, but I don't care. But he only had 3, and I had to have them because I want to build up stock of it, so that if people come and they want to see it, there it is. And I don't want it to be 2 or 3 little snowdrops. I want them to be a nice patch. And so I did buy that. And I also bought an Eranthis or aconite from Joe, because I was in the garden about 2 weeks ago, if that, of Brian Ellis. He a Galanthophile frame. If you look at his Instagram post, I mean, he posts something every day, and there's always so much interest, but especially snowdrops and aconites. But then we go on to dwarf irises and lots of other lovely things as well. And ferns.
There is not a week in the year that Brian Ellis, a bit like yourself, doesn't have something fantastic in his garden and also on his Instagram. Galanthaholic, one of my favourite accounts.
As it often is when you go to see Brian, it's not just the snowdrops that you look at. Your attention is suddenly grabbed by something else, and it was grabbed by 2 things. The first was a fern. I don't know what it is, but I think it's a Polystichum of sorts. But he gave me the name. I've lost it, and it doesn't matter. And he said, you can't get it anywhere. And I thought, I must have it. So I came home on the internet, and he's absolutely right. It isn't anywhere. So it's one that you have to put on a wish list from somewhere. Leave your name in the hope that you might get it. And maybe 10 will come along at once, who knows. And the other thing I saw was an aconite, and it's one that stood out. I don't know particularly why, it just called to me, and it's a lovely little clump, and it has the most amazing name. It's Eranthis Dooze, Dooze. And he had this clump, and it's a semi-double flower. It's got flecks of green on it, and there's some of the inner petals are slightly serrated. It's a silly thing, isn't it, when a silly old man like me gets excited over a diminutive little thing like an aconite. But I have to say that, my aconites that I bought probably 1 pot full of last year, and they're very small when you first have them, they have increased remarkably well. I haven't noticed any seedlings around them yet, but I've noticed that the clumps have got bigger. So I'm going to be dividing those. In actual fact, I'll go and do it this morning because, we do it when they're in the green. They're just going over. And we do the same with snowdrops. For instance, we don't oversplit either. For instance, I bought 5 pots of a snowdrop called Daphne scissors last year.
Oh, yeah.
And they have done so well that we split them, but we split each clump into 2. So we've now got 10, but I kept them surrounding the original clump, if you see what I mean. So you're making that little drift of them that much bigger. You don't have to have acres and acres of these special snowdrops, but I think they do look better if you've got a reasonable sized patch of them. And so we're going to be doing that. And we've been doing, or Ian has been doing this actually, because he goes off and he says, I think before I go home, I'll just go and split a few snowdrops. And off he goes with the watering can, because we puddle them in whenever we do it. I mean, a little tip for everybody, because if you're dividing these plants, you want to make sure that the roots are in contact with the soil so they can carry on getting the nutrients that they need through the rest of their growing season. And so we puddle them in, and then off we go again. And it's quite fascinating, because the next year I probably forget where I've done it. I won't forget the aconites because I haven't got many of those, but lots of the snowdrops I'll probably forget. And I think, gosh, look at that. There was only a few there last year. Now there's masses. So it's that ongoing situation. It's so fulfilling, actually. And if I think that I'm a silly old fool, I spent £100 on a snowdrop called Allan Gray because I felt I had to have it. But next year I'll probably have 3 flowers on each of those clumps, because you buy it and you've got one bulb that's flowering. You've probably got another little bulb in there that's going to flower either the year after or the year after that. So it starts the ball rolling. And once you've got the ball rolling, it's a bit like, when we used to talk to Richard Hobbs, and he used on the radio, and he used to say about growing bulbs from seed. And we used to think, oh, goodness me, but Richard, it's going to be 5 years before it flowers. Yes, it is. But if you start this year, in 5 years' time, you'll have something to look forward to. And if you sow something next year, in another 5 years, and so on and so forth. So if you sow a few seeds from bulbs every year, you're going to get surprised the next year. Do you see what I mean? 5 years down the line, probably.
What is exciting is you're really not alone in doing this now, if the video you put on our channel is anything to go by, because years ago we talked about growing Tulipa sprengeri from seed. We have mentioned this before, but I'll link to the video that we did on that originally. And then joyfully, because we had so many people not only watching it but wanting a follow-up, several years later you dug out where you'd sown them, and we went through looking at the different stages so that you could see, oh, this is the size of bulb that's coming, 3 years, however long, 5 years, however long it had been between the sowing them and then recording the follow-up. And that video has obviously also picked up for all the people who hopefully are out there growing bulbs from seed. It's exciting. You probably do need a little bit of space to store these pots or trays where you're growing them, but it can also save you an awful lot of money, because a packet of Tulipa sprengeri seed is so much cheaper than the bulbs are.
Well, the bulbs are £5 or £6 each at the moment. And I think one of the things that I would say about growing tulips from seed, just to make life a little bit easier, if you sow them in deep long-term pots. I mean, I did mine when we did the thing. I did mine in trays, and I left them outside. Well, I don't do that anymore. I've learned, because if you sow 3 or 4 seeds in a deep long-term pot, cover the surface with gravel, and then put it outside and leave it, you'll get a little something that looks like a piece of grass. That's a tulip germinating, And if you have tulips that germinate and you keep them weed free, you're going to pull a lot of them out, because you're not going to recognize the seed leaf, So I think by keeping my seed in a long time, I can keep it clean, relatively clean anyway, and I can let them grow on for 3 years, and then I can decide where I'm going to put them. And I plant the whole thing. I tip the whole thing out of the pot, dig a hole and put it in, or I dig a hole and then tip it out. You know what I mean? So you've got a clump of sprengeri there. And the other thing I'd like to mention is the fact that sprengeri, like lots of other species tulips, has actually much, much smaller bulbs than the hybrids that we grow for the garden. So don't be disappointed if your bulbs are quite small. I mean, when I say small, what can I equate them to? Something a bit bigger than a broad bean, I suppose, a broad bean seed. But they are relatively small. So don't think that you need to plump them up.
The other good thing about a long tom is I have heard from Jane Ann Walton that when she grew Tulipa sprengeri from seed in a pot, they escaped, because they dug down. They escaped out the bottom of the pot. So I'm assuming that a long tom might stop them from.
Well, that's why, that's one of the reasons I do it, because quite often you will find that tulips, if they want to be perennial, they will send what they call a dropper bulb out, and it's like this kind of rhizome that comes out the base of the bulb, and it goes down, and then when it gets to its right depth, it forms another bulb, and that is which is a key sometimes to, if you had tulips out as bedding and you dig the bulbs up, and the following year you'll get 1 or 2 coming up, and you think, well, how did I miss those? Well, you didn't. It's because they sent down a dropper, and that dropper is probably 6 inches below the mother bulb, if you like, that you dug up. So it's strange, and I think it is a way of actually encouraging tulips to be more perennial. We've got one called I can't think of the name of it now, but it's an orange tulip. Richard Hobbs mentioned it, orange with a olive green touches on the outside, and he said you won't get this one because this one came from so and so, so and so. I meant to get this tulip the year before last year. No, the year before last. Last year, I actually got onto the bulb list as soon as they came out, and I found a quantity of it. I mean, 100 bulbs is what I bought, and I got it from a rather nice nursery that is not on the main. And I couldn't tell you even what it was called, but I managed to get 100 bulbs. They were quite expensive as well, but I mean, you know, my thought behind that is like lots of other species tulips, they're much more perennial than the big fat hybrids. So I rest my case.
They might self-seed. I mean, that's always my hope, is if I can get something like sprengeri, then maybe it will put itself about where it's happy. That would be lovely.
Well, there's one lady who grows bearded irises. In conjunction with her bearded iris, she grows Tulipa sprengeri. And Tulipa sprengeri, the reason for this is because Tulipa sprengeri, she wants to know where it is and not weed it out. So it was growing amongst the bearded irises. It has a similar flowering period because it's the last tulip to flower, and it's just flowering just as the bearded irises start. And they have a long season depending on variety as well. And she grows masses and masses of it. But I'll tell you what, like most people, she said, I'll dig a few bulbs up and send them to you. Did she? No.
It is an amazing thing when people actually do send them to you. And
yeah, it is.
I must say, I've got Claud Biddulph now flowering the snowdrop, which is an amazing thing and a very generous gift to have been sent. So some people super generous, and a lot of other people forget. Mind you, I've probably been guilty of that myself.
Balborn 2 years ago very kindly sent me EA bowls, which is a snowdrop, a lovely sort of, and it's got slightly puckered seersucker outers. And she gave me a one bulb, I think, came in because she's always giving this away to somebody. It was beautifully packed in the green, and I planted it and looked after it, and I've got now 4 flowers there. So EA Bowles is doing his stuff and doing it quite well.
Oh.
I worried that he might be in too much shade, but no, he seems to like it.
Now, the great thing for your snowdrop event and for the openings you had after it and for the Hardy Plant Society kind of AGM, where lots of very, exciting and excited galanthophiles descended on the garden, the likes of Jimmy Blake alongside Brian Ellis, who we've already mentioned. There was so much appreciation for obviously the garden on a whole, but the winter garden, and for all of the things alongside the snowdrops. It's wonderful to see all of these cultivars in lovely clumps, labelled. That's a joy, because a lot of places you go to, they're not labelled. And I learned from a trip to Richard Eyre's garden, I was very lucky that your good friend Valerie Jackson asked me if I would like to go along. Her and a group of friends were going to see Richard Eyre's garden, former head gardener at Anglesey Abbey, of course. And I was saying to him what a shame it is that nowadays you go for a walk through their winter garden and none of the snowdrops are labelled. And he suggested it was probably just to stop people going along and digging them up, because that's unfortunately what happens if you have a famous collection of snowdrops. People, if they think something is worth a lot of money, might slip a trowel in there and run off with a bulb or two. So it's wonderful to come to a garden where you can see what they are and look in the flower and, oh yes, of course that's grumpy.
Yeah,
Look at its face.
And I think the main thing from the Hardy Plant Society is that all the Hardy Plant Society members are, of course, plantaholics, not just galanthophiles. This was the Galanthus group that came to the garden here. Of the national group, and they only came to the east of England, I think, because Brian Ellis at their last annual general meeting had chided them to say, well, you don't ever come to the east of England, do you? So it's always a long way for us to go. Now this year it's a long way for you to go. and they came, and they had their meeting in the school in Stalham in the morning, their annual general meeting, and then they had 2 talks, one by a Belgian fella and one by Brian Ellis. And I went to Brian's talk, and of course I did learn something. You learn something at all these sort of talks, and he was most entertaining, and it was a lovely talk. And I wanted to see his talk actually, because there's a very enthusiastic young chap called Dan that comes to the garden here, and he works in the garden here occasionally. And he said, I saw Brian Ellis talk. If you get the chance, you should go and see him. He's really good.
I bet he is.
Yes, he is. And so I did that in the morning, and then they had their snowdrop, or they'd had their snowdrop sale by the time I got there. So I listened
They
to
heard
Brian
you were
Ellis.
coming.
Quick,
Quick, get in there before Alan Gray buys everything.
But I listened to Brian Ellis, and then I left, and the lady who was seeing me out, because the school is like a rabbit warren, you know, there's corridors on corridors on corridors. And if you go left when you should go right, well, you're in a muddle. Anyway, she said to me, would you like to have a peep inside the sales area before you go? And I thought, well, I know what you're doing. You're trying to get some money out of me, because, well, she was good. And I said, well, yes, let's just have a look. There probably won't be anything that I want, because, and I have to say, I have to say that there was one snowdrop there that I had to buy, and it's one of the Fieldgate series. It's called Fieldgate Forte. And Fieldgate, they have these, I'm not sure quite what they're called, but things like bunny's ears on top of the flower, and they just looked so lovely. I bought 4 of those. They were very small amount of money. I can't remember what they were even. And I also bought something from Brian Ellis, but it wasn't a snowdrop. It was an arum. And you know, these wonderful marble arums, arum pictum and arum, whatever they're called, with lovely marble coloured veining on the leaf. And I put it so it's not in fairly close distance to some of my better arums, because some of my arums now are self-seeding, and the resultant progeny they are quite astonishing. And there's one in the garden at the Hardy Plant Society. When they came, they were all drooling over it. What's that? What's that? Which one? Which one? And I said, when I said it's a seedling here, you could tell they thought, you lucky devil. But I mean, sometimes you see it just pays to let nature take its course. And I think, as with snowdrops, you know, you quite often hear people say this was found in so-and-so's garden, or this was pointed out by, and you know, one of the things that Brian was talking about is a site in Norfolk where Greatorix had a lovely collection of snowdrops, which he bred and didn't breed, really. He just let things happen. And they're still discovering snowdrops in that acre garden, hidden away in a very sheltered, secretive place in Norfolk. And, you know, they're still discovering new varieties in there. Not necessarily new varieties, but new variations of a variety.
Well,
so
it's why somebody like Joe Sharman is so extraordinary, really, that he doesn't just let nature do its thing. There's so much thought's gone into trying to bring together certain characteristics, which is extremely complicated, and that's how come he and you know, the few breeders like him come up with such extraordinary plants, because it's very intellectual, I suppose. It's not just put these snowdrops near each other and hope that they get their jiggy on.
The brilliance of Joe is that he's not waiting for nature to take its course. He's giving nature a helping hand. So that nature is Joe is getting there before Dame Nature would naturally, if you see what I mean.
That being said, I mean, it is wonderful in the sort of history of snowdrops and Galanthophilia. The part that nature has had to play is obviously huge. And when I was in Richard's garden, I fear I won't do this story justice, but I asked him what was the snowdrop that started this whole bug for you, because his relatively small garden is devoted to snowdrops, and lots of heucheras planted alongside, some beautiful
Richard Ayres you're talking about.
Sorry, yeah, Richard Ayres. Sorry.
Yeah.
Clarify. So Richard Ayres' garden, lots of lovely co-planting, but definitely all about the snowdrops. And it all started with a snowdrop, which is very inexpensive to buy, I think, called Anglesey Abbey. And that snowdrop had been, so it turned up where all the snowdrops were sort of crossing in the area, in the kind of ditch area of Anglesey Abbey. And it was identified, I think, by Stuart Thomas, who was their garden advisor, as some sort of
Graham Stuart Thomas.
Yes, it was kind of identified.
I've got a little tale about Graham Stuart Thomas. He was a terribly, terribly clever man. I think he was advisor to the National Trust, Gardens advisor to the National Trust. And he was a slightly pompous man, and he called himself Graham Stuart Thomas because he thought having a surname, Stuart Thomas, sounded much more important than Graham Thomas. He was also very much into choral music as well, I believe. But yes, it was. You're right. Anglesey Abbey was noticed by him.
He identified this snowdrop as some kind of Russian species. Anyway, word got out to the Galanthophiles, and they just kept turning up to Richard. Could we have a bulb of this special snowdrop that you've got at Anglesey Abbey, and in order to get hold of it, they would come with their bags of special things to swap. And that's basically how the collection happened, except that when they have ended up doing DNA testing on this snowdrop, it wasn't what it had been identified as at all. So all of these galantophiles had swapped the precious bulbs from their collections in order to get hold of something which actually was just a cross between something like nivalis and woronowii. So they ended up naming it Anglesey Abbey. And I love the fact that that snowdrop, which I had bought purely because I live near Anglesey Abbey and have been there many times, and I like the sort of name behind, or the story behind the name. Actually, the story behind the name is somewhat better. So and snowdrops, like all plants really, it's all about the story. So I thought that was wonderful when I heard Richard telling me that the other day.
Well, lots of plants, you know, they're only really grown because of the story behind the name, aren't they? I mean, there's an old-fashioned delphinium called Alice Artindale, and Alice Artindale was a double delphinium, and it had lots of sort of green in. It's a very strange color. It was almost, I don't know what you'd call it really. It's well, it's a bluey green, or is it a greeny blue? I don't know. But she was notoriously difficult to overwinter. Nowadays, of course, and she was only really grown because of the fabled Alice Artindale, because she's difficult and all the rest of it. And people would say, especially people like me, who's sort of slightly thinking they can do anything, they would say, well, I can grow it, you know. And of course, they would lose it in the winter. It either got too wet or the slugs got at it or something. So it was a miffy beast. But nowadays, of course, there are delphiniums that you can grow that are as good as Alice Artindale, if not better. So, you know, maybe she's gone out of favour a little bit. But there, you know, and it's the same with snowdrops. It's the same with aconites. I mean, the one I bought when I saw it in Brian's garden has this most amazing name, Dooze. Now, does she dooze or does she don't? I don't know. Dooze. I don't know where the name came from, but it's not one you're likely to forget, is it?
No.
I mean, it's this wonderful.
Well, do you know what? Talking of brilliant names, and this is a segue and a half, and plants that I know are starting to strut their stuff and look rather marvelous in your garden. Prunus, mume, Beni-chidori. That's a good name. There was one, and I'm so on my wish list. I don't have one next. It's one of those next garden. Must be high up on the list. Next garden. Such a stunning plant.
Well, it is if it gets to a decent size, which mine now have. Ours in the garden here, I mean, they've been in a shrub border there, and suddenly, and you know, it's a kind of plant for I suppose for 11 months a year at least, you don't even notice it. It's there, but you don't notice it. So it really is it's not a plant to have in the foreground, it's a plant to have in the mid-ground to the back, if you like, depending on how big your garden is. Mine's sort of midway in a shrub border. And now it's just studded with these lovely little carmine rosettes of flowers. That's just so beautiful. And it's the kind of thing you see across the garden, and it attracts your eye one day and you think, what the heck is that? It's just a lovely, lovely plant. But it's one of those plants that I think you need a decent sized garden to have for it to justify its space in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends how much you love it. But, you know, when you have these, I mean, it's a bit like Edgeworthia we were mentioning earlier. Edgeworthia is a lovely, lovely shrub at this time of the year, but you know, later on in the year, it's probably taking up valuable space in a small garden. But it's all right if you lived somewhere and you at the end of April you decided to spend the summer somewhere else, that you would grow it because it wouldn't matter what it looks like when you're not there. No, it's just worth considering some of these early flowering plants. I mean, if you take something like Edgeworthia, it's lovely when it's flowering. Its leaves are slightly willow-like, I suppose, when it's out of flower. So it's not a great looking plant. However, if you take something like a camellia, and we've got one called Saint Ewe, E-W-E, and the lady from Wick, Philippa, and her friend went absolutely gaga over Saint Ewe because it was absolutely covered with small, single, bright pink flowers. And because it's small, there's two good things about it, because if you get a camellia with rather overly large flowers, well, they look out of place in the garden proper. I've got them here. I know I have, because I look at them and I tend to sort of turn my head the other way, because I think, you know, I don't know whether I like you or that much because you're so blousy. they're the kind of plants that look wonderful in a conservatory, a cold conservatory or something, like they have at Chatsworth, where they have these big blousy camellias, and under glass, of course, the flowers don't get spoilt by the weather, and they look absolutely wonderful. And they don't look too blousy in that setting, but in a garden setting, they do. But Saint Ewe, because it has these lovely little pink flowers, it looks dainty. And it was just covered in flowers. So she said, "Have you got plants of this?" This lady did. And I said, "No, I haven't." She said, "Oh, well, I must try cutting." And so I went and picked her a branch. She said, "Oh my God." I said, "Well, I think if you look at the size of my branch that I'm going to give you and the size of my shrub, I can afford to give you this." Now, the other good thing about St. Ewe, and Christopher Lloyd used to write about this an awful lot regarding camellias, and he too, like myself, as he got older, found that the blousy ones were rather too, just two. We say they're just two with an extra O, two. But Saint Ewe is a self-cleaning camellia, means that when its flowers are going over, it drops them. And you can either leave them there as a picturesque pink carpet, which I've done with mine until they look very brown and horrible, and then I put them on the compost heap. But lots of camellias, be careful. Try and find out if they're self-cleaning or not. If they hang on to their dead and dying flowers, it puts people off. I mean, they don't look nice. So you really, if you don't get a self-cleaning one and it annoys you, you're going to have to go and pick the dead buds off. Dead flowers up. It's a challenge, shall we say?
Talking about whether or not flowers in particular fit in a garden, I think is really interesting these days, particularly as we get sucked into Dahlia orders. I say, glancing over across the room where a box has turned up this morning from Farmer Gracie. It's actually quite heavy. I can't remember what I ordered. All I know is the baby was asleep, and I had a moment of madness. Not entire madness, because I was replacing a few things I'd lost, like brown sugar and creme de cassis, which I adore, and I lost in the hard winter, and even the partner was missing them from the garden. So I've reordered those, I've restocked on those. But then other things, I no longer buy dinner plates because I could have them at the allotment, and that's lovely and they look wonderful. But I don't find in the way I arrange flowers, as if I arrange them. The way I plonk a posy of blooms into a small vase is just not suitable for dinner plate dahlias. I can imagine at your house some wonderful display of dinner plates.
No, because I too agree with you. I mean, I too am going off dinner plate dahlias.
I love them. I love a picture of them. I want to see them on social media, but I just don't know if I want to grow them.
No, I feel exactly the same, but I have a few in the garden here because visitors like them. You know, when you're open to the public, you have to bear in mind it's not just your taste. Well, you can if you really want to, but I mean, I like to sort of think that, you know, I'm growing these things because other people like them too. And dinner plate dahlias, they are a fascination, if you like, but I don't want them in my house. And what you just said about you pick up a little posy and put it in a pot and it's in your house, it's to the scale of your house.
Yeah.
And
mine is not a dinner plate dahlia kind of house, I can tell you that much.
No, but I mean, you know, if you get a slightly bigger house, you get a slightly bigger posy. That's all you get. And I do remember Colfax and Fowler, the interior decorating shop. They used to be in Bruton Street, I think it is, in London, just around the corner from where we were anyway. And I used to go and look at their every weekend. They used to go, whoever they were went to the country, and whoever they were came back. Lots of people that were working there could do the same because they were all rather sort of city girls in the week and country girls at the weekend, and boys. And you know, every Monday there would be a fresh posy of something from the countryside, and you know, you could just say, "Oh my goodness, look, this is the kind of thing," and it was just so, dare I say, country house, or should I say, country house. But it was loose and natural and rather lovely. And, you know, when we say arrangement, I know that Bridget Girling does some, or she used to anyway, do some fantastic arrangements. But even she didn't arrange flowers as, shall we say, Constance Spry used to, in a stiff manner. And it's all about fashion and the way we live and what we want, I suppose. But I agree with you. I think a nice natural bunch of flowers is absolutely stunning.
Yeah, and smaller dahlias, they just combine better with the other things I grow. I mean, last year I finally had my Tithonia, which was so glorious and infinitely more strokeable than I'd ever considered it to be. So that was a joy. But all the things I had, Orlia grandiflora, calendulas, cosmos, they didn't want to sit. I couldn't put them next to a big dahlia. They just wouldn't. The scaling would be wrong for me. I'm not talented enough to combine them. So, and I go for a kind of whimsical dolly mixture look when I do a little posy of flowers. So anyway, that's the sort of thing I've ordered. But I just think it's interesting that there are plants, whether they're camellias, dahlias, loads of other things, finding a way to put them in the garden, I find is hard. I've bought little cheapy things from Morrison's before. I don't know if they still do, but certainly when I lived in Norwich, I'd often go to Morrison's and they had like loads of quite nice plants for about 169 outside the front. So I'd forever be going in to buy a loaf of bread and come out with a clematis or something. And some of them
well, that's all right as long as they water them. But there's lots of supermarkets that don't water them. They don't look after them. So you really want to be there no more than 2 days after they've had a delivery, if you can.
Yeah. Well, I was going in quite a lot. I'm not very good at remembering to buy lots of things. I'm always popping into shops. So I sort of go in, have a little look, buy a thing, like buy a plant every time I went in for a pint of milk. And I got lots of really lovely things, but some of them were just so, I don't know, like they were on steroids. And so I'd sort of dig those up and hand those across to somebody else because I just couldn't get them to work in the garden.
Well, so, I love the way that I noticed that visitors here, especially the ones that I talk to on a regular basis, they will come in and they always do the same thing. They'll come in and they'll talk to you, and then they'll say, well, a month ago, so-and-so had Bragmantis, and they were only $4.99 each. And they will tell you that. But I said, well, I'll go and have a look. Oh, no, they've all gone now.
Didn't Ian Roof do this to us with Daphne's? Didn't he once go to B&Q and buy like a tray of Daphne Bellua or something? I don't know which Daphne. I'm sure it was Daphne's. And I'm just so jealous. I don't have any Daphne's. Can you believe I am saying that sentence? It's like first thing that's going in the next garden, but at the moment there are no Daphne's in my garden.
Well, Daphne Bellua with you, I mean, Daphne Bellua is a little bit tender,
Yeah, well, a lot of people seem to have lost them or had them hard hit by that whatever it was last winter, not the winter just gone,
Yeah. And I mean, for instance, Val, I think, has now got it going at where she is near Royston. But it's some people I mean, for a lot of years she couldn't grow it. She tried, but then she gave up because she said, well, I'm not wasting my money anymore but now she's obviously got the right site for it. It needs a little bit of shelter.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that, I mean, I've got Daphne Bellua Mary Rose, which is it's a late flowering variety, just starting to flower now. It's got very, very dark pink flowers, and it's very, very good plant, I think.
Yes.
Lots of the Hardy Plant Society. I mean, we've got them throughout the garden here. Some I grew from seed, and they range in colour from white to sort of various shades of pink to Mary Rose, which is a deep pink. And they all flower at slightly different times because seedlings are genetically different from their parents. So you always get this kind of variation. Some started flowering at the beginning of December, and Mary Rose, for instance, is only really starting to flower now. She's been in flower for about a week, I suppose, which is interesting because if you've got the space, you can spread it out. And I did buy quite a few Daphnes, and I bought them really to put on the plant stand because people were wanting them. And I think we were retailing them at something like £28 each. And that's what they had to be. But for a lot of people, it was too expensive and they didn't buy them. So I used them in the garden. And now, of course, those same people are coming to the garden and they're seeing these wonderful plants. And I say, well, you could have bought it. It was, I know it was expensive at the time, but today it would probably cost double that.
Well, that is the main reason I don't have them in this garden, because despite the fact we're still here, from the moment I moved in, I always said, well, we're going to move. And I don't know if I'd be able to take it with me. And I didn't want to leave it to inevitably be cut down by the next person. So
yeah, well, that's
spending a lot of money on a plant which might then get razed to the ground seemed like a bad use of my money. The other thing you have to realise is that, I mean, a lot of people say, well, will it grow in a pot? And I said, yes, for a limited number of years, because everything will grow in a pot, providing you look after it, you water it and you feed it. But, you've got to watch it, because if it becomes root bound in that pot, it will then stop growing and it'll start to go backwards. And then you're facing an uphill struggle to try and get it to grow when in the garden you're going to take it to.
So do remember that it's only for a few years that you can do that.
And of course you can grow things. I did this. Peter's got a very nice Acer that we don't want to put in the ground because it was his 30th birthday present. And so I kept potting it up. Well, now it's a huge pot. It's not as easy to put up as it once was. So yeah, you have to bear that in mind as well.
One of the things that I do in the garden here, there's an Acer called Flamingo, something flamingo, and it's got pink. It's hectic. It's got flamingo pink stems to the leaves and to the young growth on the plant. The leaves are a combination of pink and cream and grey green. And that sounds like a mess. I mean, it almost sounds like a bowl of sick, doesn't it? But I mean, it is a stunning plant. I grow them in pots either side of my front door, which faces north, which is what they like because they don't like sun on them too much, but without any overhead shade, if you see what I mean. So it's on the north side of the house. And I've just put 2 of them in the garden because they've got too big for the pots that they're in. And I've replaced them with another couple of Acers. I have to say the flamingo one is slightly weeping so that you can, in actual fact, train a leader up a cane. So you get this wonderful column of foliage coming down. It hasn't got any foliage on it now, of course, just the weeping stems. But the one I replaced it with is Acer aconitifolium, which has got this wonderful fresh green. I suppose the leaves are a bit like an aconitum in that they're quite jagged and things. Now I've got these in pots. They'll be in pots for 3, maybe 4 years, and then they too will go in the garden and we'll start again. Because, I mean, you know, Acers in pots are, again, you can only do it for so long if you want to maintain the health of the plant. And of course we do. I mean, we don't want something sitting on the doorstep that's looking positively horrendous. One thing I'm rather pleased about this year is the fact that I've got a narcissus, and it's called St. Patrick's Day, and it's a lovely limey green to primrose yellow, I suppose, daffodil. And I had 2 coppers full of them last year, and I decided to leave the bulbs in the coppers, and we put them where our nursery stock is kept, so they got watered and fed regularly. And they died down, and we left them in the pot. I took a little bit of the soil off the top dressed them with fresh compost, and they are absolutely full of lovely new shoots. So that's a little tip for you. If you want a daffodil, but you want to be able to leave in a pot throughout the summer, mind you, remember, you're going to have to look after it until the foliage dies down, which is probably in May or something like that. St. Patrick's Day is a very good one. Look it up and see what it looks like. It's very nice.
Oh, sounds marvellous. I am a sucker for a green flower. Now the time is absolutely like whirring away. We've managed to digress onto a load of different things. I think one other thing we wanted to talk about that's been going on at East Ruston is quite a lot of pruning and replanting shelter belts and that kind of behind the scenes action that is so important.
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, our shelter belts are getting too big. We planted Monterey pines and they have got rather too big. The other thing about them is, of course, they were quite close together. So lots of the lower branches have lost their leaves and they look a bit untidy. And so what we did when we planted, just after we planted the Montereys, behind them we planted a row of acorns from the home oak, so Quercus ilex. And this row of acorns has grown and they're a bit of a wispy hedge behind them before there's the boundary hedge, which is hawthorn. So we've taken some of the Montereys out, and you know, after a year it's amazing because you suddenly see these home oaks, they're bushing out and they're looking wonderfully sort of healthy. And the Monterey pines have probably got to a height of maybe 40 feet, maybe more, I don't know, but you know, substantial height, and they were making an awful lot of shade, too much shade really, although they did their job keeping the wind out. And I'm quite happy for that shelter belt to be at a lower level. And so we're actually taking them out and we're reinforcing the home oak hedge where we've got sort of gaps in it. I'm planting young saplings, which I've got some in a pot, which we've grown in pots, which I've grown from seed. And so we're using those as fillers as well. And we're planting lots of other things in this as this sort of third rank of windbreak, if you like. And we're starting with lots of hollies. I mean, Graham loves hollies. We've got over 100 and goodness knows how many different varieties of hollies. And Joe gave me another one when he came to the snowdrop day. He gave me one with orange berries, which is lovely because they are bright orange. You know, I'm looking forward to using that. although that's going to go in a more prominent place. But we're filling out with hollies that we've grown from cuttings and things, because they're hollies take from cuttings very well done in the winter. And it's nice to be able to do that when you've got the time to do it and you haven't got so much on. And so we were filling out with things like that. But when we come to the winter garden, one of the things that the Hardy Plant Society members actually said, they were very interested the way we'd used plants in the winter garden to give so much interest. And when you think of winter gardening, you think leaf, bark, and berry, perhaps. But there are other things, and you get to this side of Christmas, if you like, or the beginning of the year, and we've got snowdrops, and we've got aconites, and we've got some of the early flowering things, like the little irises and things like that, and hepaticas too. Lovely clump of hepaticas out as well. But they were interested in the way we'd use contrasting foliage. And I was going to say this about, which I don't think I mentioned, about Saint Ewe, the camellia, because although it seems to happen earlier and earlier, the flowers on camellias, but they flower and they have this big splash of colour and everything else. And then what are you left with? Well, what you're left with is a very comely bush. And why is it comely? It's comely because if you look at the leaves, they're shiny, they're light reflecting, they're always cheerful. Even on a sunny, dry day, they look as if they've just been rained upon. It's that sort of freshness that they have. And so we use them as much for their foliage in the winter garden as well as their flowers. But there's lots of other things that we put with them. I mean, variegated box, for instance, if you seek out cultivars of various box, Tim Fuller from the Plantsman's Preference has a very nice weeping variegated box. Well, not only does the variegated foliage, which is creamy yellows and lemons on the green shoots, but the shoots sort of splay outwards, and they make it like a lovely little dumpling. So there's something nice that you can have towards the front, and then you can have your small bulbs in the front of it and things growing through it in the summer if you wish. But it's just searching out the different types of foliage. Think of if you take leaves, for instance, think of green leaves. Think of, all shades of green. You take the green of pilaria, for instance, it's very dark. And then if you go to the green of griselineus, for instance, it is a bright, appley green. The contrast is amazing. The textures of leaves, they're different too. The texture of a filaria is very, very leathery. Of griselinia, it's soapy in texture. It's a very strange thing. And I can remember going back 40 years, griselinia was not the kind of shrub you would see widely grown in England. We were too cold to grow it properly in the winter. It didn't like us. And you go to Ireland, Southern Ireland especially, and there it would be growing almost to tree-like proportions. And it's just that tiny little zip in a blip, if you like, in the difference between whether you can keep a plant in this country or whether you can't. Go to the Channel Islands and see what they're growing on the Channel Islands, and you'll see that, outside there they have the winter flowering brugmansias. We can't grow them outside here because Dame Nature, she has that horrible card up her sleeve, and he disappears, comes and goes as he likes. He's called Jack Frost. He comes in varying amounts. But no, it was interesting to hear people comment on the putting together of different kinds of foliage. And if you think about it further on, take it a step further on, it's like people arranging a bunch of flowers, if you like, because what you put together pleases the eye. And it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong, or whether it pleases somebody else's eye. If you put it together so that it pleases your eye, that's really all that matters. If somebody else likes it, that's a compliment. If they don't like it, who cares? It's your garden anyway.
And talking of variegation, it was something that really caught my eye at Anglesey, was some of the beautiful combinations of, say, a really soft viburnum flower, and then behind it a variegated hedge, and you get all these lovely kind of creams and pinks mixing together. Now, I actually, sometimes when you get a variegated Daphne, say with a pinkish flower, I'm not sure I like it, but somehow with the distance between them, of a hedge and a bush, it was working for me, and I was very taken with those sort of softer, almost, I don't know, there's like a fairy-like palette. No wonder I liked it.
Well, there's a Daphne called Daphne odora, and Daphne odora marginata with a thin golden leaf, the edge to the leaf, is slightly hardier than the plain green one. And when we grew Daphne odora, first time I ever saw it was at Lanhydrock House in Cornwall, and we were there early spring, and we'd gone down to see the spring gardens, in actual fact, and we were there for about a week. And we went to Lanhydrock House, and we were walking from the car park round to the shop in one of the stable blocks there. And I said to Graham, that scent, whatever is it? It's amazing. And we got to and this was about 30 feet away. And when we got to the door, the entrance door, there were two bushes, one either side. And they looked like dumplings, and they were Daphne odora Oreo marginata. And that this scent permeated. I had to have it, and of course I did. Now, later on, there was a variety of Daphne odora marginata called Rebecca. And Rebecca had a much, much wider variegation on the leaf. And it was kind of on the yellow side of cream. And it offended you because the flowers came out and it smelled wonderful, but it looked horrendous.
This is what I'm talking about. That's
Yeah,
Rebecca.
exactly. Exactly. See, plant breeders, they find this new thing and they think it's going to be a lovely plant. I fell for the hype. I'm a sucker for plants, I guess, though, and I fell for the hype, and I thought, wouldn't it be rather nice to have a seat and have 4 bushes of this Daphne leading up to the seat, 2 on either side, so that you sit there and you can just close your eyes and sniff away to your heart's content and be transported. Well, of course, the first year was wonderful. They looked lovely. And then the second year, one died, and then another one died. And I think I was left with one. And in the end, I thought, yes, well, I'm rather pleased I've only got one because I don't have to look at 3 others. But, hey
yeah. I keep waiting to start liking it, because sometimes you can flip. You can go from not liking a plant to liking it.
It
hasn't happened yet.
After this conversation, I doubt you will.
Quite true. Now, we must wrap things up before babies and dogs start making noises in the background and distracting me. Flomo, I kind of wish we could have posted somebody, particularly when the Hardy Plant Society came to your garden, just posted them by the gate, the exit gate, and asked people what their Flomo was, because I would have loved the list from proper plants people in particular. What were the plants that they wished they had in their garden? It would have been a whole episode in its own right. But anyway, I've thought of that a bit too late. My Flomo, having not been to your garden for Snowdrop Day, is a snowdrop. And it's nothing new. It's nothing crazy. It's not one of Joe's latest introductions or anybody else's. I mean, there are always those. But when I was in Richard Eyre's garden, his planting of trumps was just looking stupendous. And then I was looking back through some of my screenshots on Instagram, where I regularly screenshot plants that I want. And I'd seen that Tim Fuller, who was just on the podcast, he had posted trumps looking fantastic. And I think particularly when you get that low sunlight at this time of year on a nice, healthy, vigorous clump of trumps, it just looks fantastic. And I haven't looked how much they cost, but I don't feel like they're one of the more expensive snowdrops you can buy. And I don't have it, but I think I must have it. And I may possibly manage to sneak to one of the snowdrop events before the season is out. So who knows? Maybe I will get one before snowdrop season comes to a close.
Can I come to your rescue?
Yes, please.
Well, because we have got trumps, and trumps is a snowdrop. I first saw it in the English. No, it was in the RHS magazine. Roy Lancaster used to have a regular page, and he always had the most wonderful plants in his garden that you wanted and you couldn't grow or you couldn't get and things like that. And he was talking about trumps, and he said somebody, very kind lady, he'd mentioned it somewhere, and she'd heard he'd mentioned it, and he hadn't got it, so she sent him a clump, a very generous clump. And I have to say, it was my introduction to the virescent or the green varieties, the little green petally bits on the outside of the outer petals that swung me in this way. And we've got several now, lots of different ones. But I mean, Alan Gray has a little bit of virescence on the outside, snowdrop. And Cowhouse Green is one that I love. Yes. It's a very old variety, and I'm about to dig that up and divide it as well. But it's quite a late variety, so that's only just starting to open now. And it's nice to have a long season of snowdrop. But going back to trumps has produced many, many different varieties. There's trumpaloot, there's goodness knows how many. But trumps itself is a very good snowdrop for increasing, and it increases very quickly. And I was going to say I'd like to dig some up and put them in a pot, and then I'll just leave them in the pot until our paths cross. And then you will have, maybe it won't happen until the bulbs have died down. That doesn't matter. But if I'd done it, and I put it on Thordis's pile. How's that?
Oh, I would love that. I love it. My pile, my little mini mountain of plants. How exciting.
You mentioned very briefly some of the new varieties, and one particular one from Joe is Princess Beni. And Princess Beni is a double peculiform, and that means that all the petals in the flower are the same length. So you get that little green marked bell in the middle of a snowdrop. Well, they're all the same length. So if you turn it upside down, it looks like the inside of a ballroom skirt or something. And these lovely little pinky orange bubbly bits in the middle. But that full flower, he's absolutely got that full double peculiform. And it is splendid. It's absolutely stunning to look at. It's very, very expensive, of course, at the moment. And if I said £1,000, I wouldn't be selling it cheap, because that's what the cost of it was. It will come down in future years as there get to be more and more of them. But, this snowdrop, I mean, you think it's, well, it's probably taken between 15 and 20 years for Joe to produce this. With crossing and back crossing, and you got to twin scale the bulbs, and then you've got to grow the twin scaling produces bulbils. So and it's very intense. Everything has got to be terribly sterilized.
I've observed Joe doing this, and it's so there is so much involved. I mean, not least
it's almost like a heart surgeon working away doing it. Then you've got to grow those little bulbils on for 3 to 5 years before they reach flowering size. So you can see it's quite a long and involved process to get decent numbers of them. But I'm looking very, very forward. That's my Flomo, by the way, Princess Beni. I'm looking very, very, very forward to having a Princess Beni or two in the garden. Hopefully 5 or 7 or 12 or 14, but
And actually, another Flomo, you mentioned Daphne, Mary Rose. You also mentioned waiting lists. I put myself on a, let me know when it's available list for that 3 years ago or something. I don't know. And never got an email. I don't know if it ever will be available. But I kind of hope not right now, because I haven't got anywhere to put it. I thought I'll put myself on the list.
I haven't had a piece of news today that one very, very well-known wholesale nursery supplier has been micro propping it and is now offering very young plants for sale. So
I felt me and everybody else listening to and watching this podcast just sort of getting excited and possibly digging into their purse.
I think you can safely say that by 2025 there will be young plants of it for sale quite widely.
How exciting. And you know what? The good thing about it is, you mentioned getting drawn into things because there's a big hype or whatever. I don't care whether it's ubiquitous. That's just a really exciting plant to me. That colour of flower, the scent, the leaves, all of it together. I don't care whether everyone else has one. I want one.
Well, no, and that's as it should be, because that's your taste. I mean, so many people are put off plants by municipal planting. I mean, cotoneasters or cotoneasters, as they say. Cotoneasters. Well, it's been ruined by being in supermarket car parks and around the football ground and things like that. And people don't want it because they've seen too much of it. They've had their fill of it. I've had my fill of filaria. I've never liked it. Graham bought one, we put it in the garden here. And I did actually eventually get rid of it because to me, I don't like this habit of growth. And you saw it in every little suburban garden. They'd made a front hedge of it or something. And I used to have to go, oh, please don't.
Isn't it funny, though, that you get these associations? So for me, a good old cotoneaster, I love, sort of regardless of any municipal planting I've seen, in which, to be honest, is nearly every municipal planting. We used to have one against the front window of my parents' house. And I would just sit on the sofa the other side of the window. And because it was right up against the glass, you could see all the bees visiting the tiny flowers. And I absolutely, and then the birds after the berries. It was wonderful.
Was that Cotoneaster horizontalis?
I'm not sure actually.
But it's called the fishbone one. It has
I'm not sure it was, but yeah.
Branches. Yeah. That is one of my favourite plants, in actual fact. I love it because I just love the structure of it. Yeah. I love the fact that it has such a long season of interest. You've got very, very early into growth, little signs of growth, and you've got all the lovely flowers. And as you say, the bees and the insects are all over it. Yeah. And then as we go through the period of the summer when it's not doing very much at all, autumn comes and it's got those lovely red berries. And then later on, after the red berries, the leaves turn red before they then drop. And then you've got this fabulous skeletal form. Yeah. So it's got what's not to like about it. It's got a lovely, lovely shape, a lovely form, and it's an easy plant. I do love it. I've got it in the garden here.
Well, there you go. If you want to love a cotoneaster, go for horizontalis.
And if you like variegated foliage, there's a very, very nice variegated version of it as well. I prefer the plain green one, but you have what you like.
It's your garden.
Absolutely.
I have loved this. What a wonderful planty chat. We will hopefully manage to fit in a March special as well. We also mentioned hepaticas as part of this conversation. Fingers crossed. Coming up shortly on the Talking Dirty podcast will be rather a special episode if you like hepaticas. We haven't recorded it yet, though, so the less said, the better in case I jinx it. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us and happy gardening.
Happy gardening, everybody. Looking forward to hepaticas.
We know what we're doing. Right, so how was the two?
Glad you did.
Well,
I think it's a Polystichum of some sort. But anyway.
Love keeps
Sorry, I got rather put off by somebody walking behind me, but that's not their fault. They weren't to know.
It's all right. Shall we revisit your I saw a fern and I can
Well, as often is often the case, you know, when you go to visit Brian, it's not just the ferns that you Anyway.
When the sun comes out, this is brilliant. Do you know, like in the 80s when they made a music video and they had limited special effects? One of them seemed to be like they'd all go a bit like a cartoon and it'd all be highlights with a little bit of shadow. That's what happens when the sun comes out. You look like you're stepping out of an 80s music video or something. It's funny talking about garden. It's funny talking. Brain in gear, brain in gear.